All right, hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are tackling something that I know a lot of you have been asking about, picky eating in autistic kids.
Yeah, this is a big one.
And, we've got a whole stack of research, articles, expert advice, really trying to get to the bottom of this. And I got to say, just skimming through the material, it's pretty fascinating. I'm seeing some really practical tips and strategies here.
I think one of the things that's so interesting is that it goes way beyond just, kids being fussy.
Right, it's not just, oh, they don't like broccoli.
No, not at all. We're talking about sensory processing differences, right? Cognitive differences, behavioral patterns, even biological factors can play a role.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. You mentioned sensory processing. What does that look like in the context of picky eating?
Well, think about it this way. You know how some artistic children experience sensory input more intensely?
Right.
So textures, tastes, smells, temperatures, all those things that, most of us don't even really think about when we're eating.
Yeah, you just kind of eat.
Right? But for some autistic kids, these can be really overwhelming, like intensely so. Like that mushy banana that most kids love
Yeah.
could be a total sensory nightmare. Imagine that feeling just magnified tenfold. And it's not just texture, right? A mild taste for you or me could be intensely bitter or sour or even just like off for an autistic child.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it like that.
For someone with heightened sensory sensitivities, that could feel incredibly overwhelming, like an assault on their senses. And the same thing goes for smells or textures or even the appearance of a food.
So it's not just, oh, I don't like broccoli. It's like a whole deeper visceral experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes beyond just disliking the sensation. It can trigger anxiety and even fear. So the research actually talked about something called food neophobia, which is a fear of new foods. And it's a lot more prevalent in autistic children.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you think about if the world already feels unpredictable, trying a new food is just like another layer of uncertainty and
Yeah.
potential discomfort.
And potential for something bad to happen.
Right.
So it's not even about being difficult or trying to control the situation. It's just navigating a world that feels scary
Yeah, or
or
exactly.
overwhelming or unpredictable.
You hit the nail on the head. And then on top of the sensory and relational aspects, there's also the physiological component. So GI issues like constipation and reflux are more common in autistic children, and that discomfort can really impact their relationship with food.
So it's really like this perfect storm of different contributing factors.
Yeah.
And what about the biological piece you mentioned?
Well, some autistic children have what's called limited interoception, meaning they have difficulty sensing internal body signals,
Like what kind of signals?
like hunger and fullness. So imagine not really knowing when you're actually hungry or full.
Oh, wow.
It makes intuitive eating pretty tough.
Yeah, if you don't know what your body's telling you, how do you know when to eat?
Exactly. So you can see how all these different factors come together, right?
This is a lot to process, honestly. I could see why parents might feel totally overwhelmed. This makes me think, too, about how we as parents or caregivers often approach mealtimes with a certain set of expectations based on our own experiences with food.
Right.
Do you think that lack of understanding can actually create more tension at the table?
Oh, absolutely. When we don't understand those underlying reasons for picky eating, it's easy to get frustrated, and then we resort to pressure tactics, and those ultimately backfire. That's why this, deep dive into the why is so crucial. It helps us to shift our perspective and
Right.
approach mealtimes with empathy and understanding. Once we understand that, we can start exploring some strategies that address those issues
Yeah,
rather than just focusing on the surface level behavior.
because our sources highlight several evidence-based strategies that can help make mealtimes less stressful and more successful. And I know a lot of our listeners are searching for those practical solutions, so I'm really eager to hear more about these approaches.
Okay, well, let's start with one of the most fundamental strategies, and that's establishing a routine. So consistent meal times, even snack times, can make a world of difference.
So are you saying that we should ditch the grazing all-day approach and have very set times for meals and snacks?
Yeah.
So what's the reasoning behind that?
Well, research by Anderson and his colleagues back in 2021 found that consistent meal times actually help establish hunger cues. So when a child's body gets used to eating at certain times, they're more likely to feel hungry at those times and be more receptive to the food offered.
So it's all about setting those internal clocks
Yeah,
and creating that predictable rhythm around food.
precisely. And predictability is key for reducing anxiety, which, as we discussed, can be a major factor in picky eating. Another powerful strategy that builds on that concept is something called food chaining.
I've heard of that, but can you explain that for our listeners who might be unfamiliar with the term?
Of course. Food chaining involves starting with a food that the child already enjoys and making very gradual changes over time. So let's say they love chicken nuggets. You might start by switching from the store-bought kind to a homemade version, or you try a slightly different breading. The key is to introduce those changes very slowly, so it doesn't feel overwhelming to the child.
So you're building on that sense of familiarity and comfort,
Right.
and introducing the novelty in very tiny, manageable increments.
Yeah, exactly.
Did the research you mentioned support the effectiveness of food chaining?
Absolutely. A study by Sieverling and his team in 2018 found that food chaining was very effective for expanding food variety. It allows the child to gradually adjust to new tastes and textures without feeling overwhelmed.
It sounds like a much gentler approach than putting a plate of new foods in front of a child and being like, here you go, dig in.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us to another important strategy, minimizing distractions. So the sources emphasize making mealtimes as calm and distraction-free as possible. So that means, turning off the TV, putting away phones, creating a peaceful environment where the child can really focus on the food.
So no more screens at the dinner table.
It can be tough, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's one that I know I struggle with as a parent.
Another helpful tip is to use visual schedules to prepare the child for what's coming next. This can reduce anxiety because it provides that clear roadmap of the mealtime routine.
I am a big fan of visual schedules.
Yeah.
They can be so helpful for creating predictability and easing transitions. So in this case, the visual schedule might include things like washing hands,
Yeah,
sitting down at the table, eating, and then maybe clearing their plate.
precisely. It helps them anticipate what's going to happen next, which can be really reassuring.
Oh, and I've even seen like where you could use Velcro or magnets so the child can like move through each step as they complete it.
Exactly. It makes the whole process visual and interactive, which can be so helpful. One that I found really interesting was encouraging sensory exploration without the pressure to actually eat.
So you're saying let kids touch and smell and even play with the food,
Yeah,
but not force them to take a bite.
exactly. It's all about getting comfortable with that sensory experience first. If you think about it, if you were hesitant to try a new food, wouldn't you want to smell it first or touch it to kind of get a sense of what it's like?
I would. And
Yeah,
that's a good point because it takes that pressure off and lets them approach the food on their own terms.
exactly. And research has shown that that kind of play-based exposure can actually help with food acceptance.
Okay, well, speaking of encouraging food acceptance, I know a lot of parents rely on positive reinforcement to motivate their picky eaters.
Uh-huh.
Did our sources address that at all?
They did, and they emphasized the importance of praise over brides. So instead of focusing on getting them to eat a certain amount, celebrate any interaction they have with the food. A touch, a smell, a lick. All of that is progress.
So shifting our focus from you have to eat this entire portion to, wow, you touched that broccoli, that's amazing.
You got it. The goal is to create positive associations with new foods and reinforce any effort they make towards trying something new.
It sounds like we're really starting to build a solid foundation for understanding and addressing picky eating.
So what happens when praise isn't enough and we're facing, those classic picky eating battles? Yeah, I mean, that's when it gets tricky, right? When
Yeah.
those evidence-based strategies meet real life, it's like, oh, now what?
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, so our sources have some great advice for navigating common scenarios.
Okay, so let's tackle them one by one. Let's talk texture. We talked about how heightened sensory sensitivities can make certain textures really unbearable for some autistic children. So let's say a child only eats mashed potatoes.
Okay.
How on earth do we get them to consider diced potatoes?
Well, I think, again, patience and tiny steps are really key here because it might seem like a huge leap from smooth mashed potatoes to chunky diced ones, but you can bridge that gap with gradual modifications. So you could start by, let's say, slightly matching those diced potatoes, leaving some smaller chunks in there.
Okay.
Or maybe add some crunchy toppings to their mashed potatoes, like crushed crackers or a sprinkle of toasted nuts. Just something to kind of, again, find that sweet spot between familiar and new.
So you're slowly introducing new textures while still offering that safe, familiar base.
Exactly.
What about taste? Some kids are really sensitive to strong flavors or spices.
Absolutely. And again, it's about starting small and building from there. If a child prefers bland foods, you can start by adding very mild seasonings, just a pinch at a time. Another strategy is to let them dip their food into a preferred sauce. Ketchup, ranch dressing, hummus, whatever they enjoy. That way they're still in control of the flavor intensity.
Dipping sauces, lifesaver in my house.
Right.
Big fan.
For all of us.
What about smell? That's another big one.
Yeah.
Some kids are so sensitive to strong odors that it just completely turns them off from even trying a food.
Absolutely. Strong smells can be a major trigger for
Yeah.
some children. One simple tip is to let the food cool down a bit before serving it. That can often lessen the intensity of the smell. You can also try serving stronger smelling foods separately so they don't overpower the entire plate.
Those are some really practical tips, and I appreciate how they focus on respecting the child's sensory experience while still encouraging them to explore those new foods. Now, what about brand-specific preferences? I know some kids are incredibly loyal to a certain brand of yogurt or cracker, and they won't even consider trying anything else.
Oh, the brand loyalty dilemma.
Yes,
It's real.
very real.
One strategy our sources mentioned is to gradually mix the preferred brand with a new brand. So you could start with just a tiny amount of the new brand and slowly increase that ratio over
Oh,
time.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's kind of a sneaky tactic, but it can be really effective.
I like it. It's about subtly expanding their horizons without making them feel like their preferences are being disregarded. It's
Right.
about building that trust. What's really striking me here is how much of this is about shifting our perspective as parents. Like, it's not about winning a battle. It's about understanding our child's needs and meeting them where they are.
That's a fantastic insight, and it's something the source emphasizes throughout. It's not about forcing change, it's about collaborating with your child to create a positive and enjoyable experience around food. Exactly. Building trust is so important. And speaking of trust, one of the best ways to foster that trust around food is to involve the child in meal preparation. Even young children can help with simple tasks like washing fruits and vegetables, tearing lettuce for a salad, mixing ingredients. It really gives them a sense of ownership over the meal.
I love that idea. And not only does it give them that sense of ownership, but it also exposes them to new foods in a very safe, non-threatening way.
Absolutely. And when we talk about exposing children to new foods, it's important to remember that sometimes the best approach is simply to offer the food without any pressure to eat it. So just place it on the table, let them observe it, smell it, maybe even touch it.
So we're shifting from, you must eat this, to, this is here if you want to explore it.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off and allows the child to approach that new food on their own terms. You can encourage them to take a tiny taste or lick it. But again, no forcing, no coercion, and remember to praise any interaction they have with the food, even if it's just a sniff or a poke.
Yeah, making it a very safe space for exploration and showing them that trying new things is not this scary, high-pressure situation.
Right.
Our sources also emphasize the importance of staying calm when a child has a really strong negative reaction to a food, which I think is easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, for sure.
But what tips do they offer for handling those meltdowns?
It can be really frustrating to witness those reactions, but it's so crucial to stay calm. Avoid forcing or bribing. Those tactics just create more negative associations with food. Instead, focus on validating their feelings and offering some age-appropriate choices.
So instead of saying, you have to eat this, it's good for you, we might say, I see that you're not a fan of the broccoli right now. That's okay. Would you like some carrots or some peppers instead?
Exactly. It gives them a sense of control and autonomy, which can be really empowering.
Yeah, it's shifting that power dynamic. And speaking of control, another common challenge is mealtimes that devolve into these power struggles.
Oh yeah, the infamous mealtime battles.
I think every parent has experienced this at some point.
Yeah.
What insights do our sources offer for navigating those power struggles?
The key is to remember that those behaviors are often stemming from a need for control, especially in a world that can feel very unpredictable for autistic children.
So it's not really about the food itself. It's about asserting their independence, feeling like they have a say in what's happening.
Exactly. And again, offering choices is a great way to address that. Let them choose between two different types of milk. Or maybe they get to decide whether they want their sandwich cut in half or into triangles. It might seem like a small thing to us, but for them, it can make a world of difference.
Yeah, it's about shifting our perspective from, I'm in control, to, we can work together on this.
Exactly. And don't forget about the power of involving them in meal prep, as we discussed earlier. That sense of ownership can really go a long way.
Okay. Because it seems like, so many kids get stuck eating the same 5 things on repeat. And one of the sources actually called it food jail, which I thought was, kind of funny, but also very accurate.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where the food chaining approach comes in, right? It's about leveraging those existing preferences as stepping stones to greater variety.
But there's another big one that I know weighs on many parents' minds, and that's nutrition.
Yeah.
If a child is only eating a very limited range of foods, how can we ensure that they're getting the nutrients that they need.
That's a very valid concern, and our sources offer some reassuring advice on that front. One common tip is to sneak in veggies wherever you can, blend them into sauces, soups, smoothies, add them to ground meat dishes, even mixing finely chopped veggies into muffins or pancakes.
I'm all about those sneaky veggie tactics.
Sometimes you gotta get creative.
You do.
Another tip is to offer fortified versions of their favorite foods. There are protein-enriched pastas, iron-fortified cereals, even breads with added fiber.
Yeah.
You can boost that nutritional value without drastically changing the taste or texture.
So it's about finding those subtle ways to enhance the nutritional content of their meals.
Exactly. And don't forget about constipation, which, as we mentioned earlier, is quite common in autistic children. Make sure you're offering fiber-rich foods like whole grain crackers, fruits, veggies, even smoothies with added chia seeds or flax seeds.
This is all so incredibly helpful. It feels like we're moving beyond those battles and finding ways to work with our kids, respect their needs, and still ensure that they're getting the nourishment that they need.
Absolutely. Honestly resonated with me the most in all this research. It's all about respect, understanding, and creating a positive food environment.
Well, that makes me feel hopeful, honestly, because so much of what I've read before felt very much like, oh, it's a battle of wills. This feels more collaborative.
Yeah, definitely. Patience is key. It can take multiple exposures before a child will accept a new food.
I remember the source mentioning it can take 10, 15, even 20 exposures sometimes, which is a lot.
It's a marathon, not a sprint, but every step forward, no matter how small, is worth celebrating.
This is so inspiring, honestly. I feel like we've gone from feeling overwhelmed to feeling empowered.
That's the power of knowledge, right? When we understand the underlying reasons for picky eating, we can approach mealtimes with more empathy and effectiveness.
Ready for some recipe talk. I'm really curious about these healthy twists on kid favorites that we keep mentioning.
Oh, me too. Remember how we were saying that it's not about depriving kids, It's all about making those familiar foods more nutritious.
Exactly.
Let's get ready to be inspired. We're talking 20 commonly loved foods, but with a healthy twist.
All right, you've piqued my interest. Give me some examples.
Let's start with a classic, mac and cheese. But this version swaps regular pasta for whole wheat and uses a homemade cheese sauce blended with cauliflower puree.
Oh, sneaky veggies. I like it.
Extra creaminess, too.
Win-win. Okay, what else?
Chicken nuggets. This recipe uses ground chicken, oat flour, and bakes instead of frying them for a healthier take.
Okay, that's a game changer. What about some sides?
You can bake or air fry those potatoes instead of deep frying for healthier French fries or sweet potato fries.
Still crispy on the outside, soft on the inside.
Exactly.
I love it.
There's pizza with a whole wheat crust and veggie pack sauce.
Okay.
And of course, no recipe roundup would be complete without a good smoothie. This one blends bananas, spinach, Greek yogurt, and almond milk.
Oh, yum.
Creamy, nutrient-packed, perfect for breakfast or a snack.
Those all sound amazing. But you mentioned that the sources talk about customizing these recipes for different sensory preferences and dietary needs. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
For those who prefer smoother textures, there are blended soups, mashed potatoes, creamy smoothies. For the crunch lovers, baked chicken nuggets, air-fried fries, popcorn.
So many good options. What about for families dealing with dietary restrictions?
Yep, they've got that covered too. Gluten-free mac and cheese, pizza, pancakes, all using alternative flours like almond or oat flour. For dairy-free cheese, plant-based milk, even avocado for a creamy texture.
So it sounds like there really are options no matter what the dietary needs are.
Yes.
And these recipes really are a great starting point for families.
Definitely. And for even more personalized inspiration, the sources include Super Brain Booster. It's a blend of banana, avocado, blueberries, and spinach, packed with nutrients.
Brain power and deliciousness.
Big guglet. And then there's the Choco Banana Delight, a healthy milkshake with banana, oat milk, unsweetened cocoa powder, nut butter, and a touch of honey.
Okay, I'm sold. Those sound amazing. It's really inspiring to see how individualized these recipes can be.
It really highlights that even with picky eating, mealtimes can be enjoyable and nutritious for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important message is that picky eating and autism is complex, but it's not a hopeless situation. There's a reason behind the behavior, and there are evidence-based strategies and creative solutions that can help.
Absolutely. It's about shifting our mindset, understanding the why, and approaching mealtimes with empathy and patience. And it's so reassuring to see all those delicious and nutritious options out there.
Before we go, one final thought-provoking question. What if, in addition to involving your child in meal preparation, you also involve them in meal planning and grocery shopping?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Could that empower them and increase their willingness to try new things?
Giving them a voice in that whole process,
Yeah.
choosing the recipes, picking out the ingredients, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to consider as you navigate this journey. And remember, you're not alone. There are resources, communities, and professionals ready to support you.
Absolutely.
We hope this deep dive is giving you some helpful insights and strategies to try at home. Celebrate those small victories, be patient, and make mealtimes positive and enjoyable for everyone.
And until next time, happy and healthy eating.